members of Team Clark were very present.
5 words, said in front of cameras, said with a smile, said by a veteran who knew exactly what she was doing.
You have sore losers and you have sore winners, and Kelsey Plum is.
And now, after Caitlin Clark just stood on an international stage and accepted FIBA MVP honors in front of the entire basketball world, Kelsey Plum has decided she has something to say again.
Caitlin Clark is the one bringing in the numbers.
Well, there's one.
But here's what nobody is connecting. Kelsey Plum didn't just make a jealous comment. She revealed something that the WNBA's veteran class has been quietly hiding for over a year. And now that Caitlin Clark has gone international, now that the whole world is watching, there is nowhere left to hide. The mask is completely off, and the fallout has only just begun. Let's set the scene properly, because context is everything here, and without it, you won't fully grasp how tone-deaf, how spectacularly ill-timed, and how deeply revealing Kelsey Plum's response actually was. Caitlin Clark just won FIBA MVP. Not a fan vote, not a social media poll, not a marketing award handed out by a brand looking for headlines. A competitive international basketball honor, earned on the floor in front of global competition, representing the United States of America on the world stage. Think about what that means. This is a player who in the span of roughly 18 months went from college phenomenon to WNBA attendance record breaker to international MVP. She didn't just survive the transition from college to professional basketball, she accelerated through it like she was running on a different fuel source than everyone else. The viewership numbers alone tell the story that no pundit, no critic, no jealous teammate can argue with.
Watching for the league, we're really watching for Caitlin Clark. Everyone's going to be making more because of Caitlin.
That's not opinion. That's economic reality documented in television contracts, ticket sales, merchandise revenue, and expansion fees that went from $50 million to $250 million almost overnight. A number so staggering that franchise owners who had been waiting decades for this moment couldn't believe what they were looking at. And now, on top of everything she has already built domestically, Caitlin Clark has taken her game to the international stage and walked away with MVP honors. The story wasn't just growing, it was going global. So what did Kelsey Plum do the moment the basketball world was celebrating one of the most decorated individual runs in the history of women's basketball? She stepped in front of a microphone and made sure everyone knew she wasn't happy about it. Now, let's be precise here, and because precision matters when we're talking about what Plum said and what it revealed. This wasn't some explosive rant. This wasn't a clipboard getting slapped across a room. Plum is smarter than that, or at least she thinks she is. This was the subtle version of jealousy, the dressed up in talking points version, the kind of shade that's designed to land with a certain audience while giving her just enough plausible deniability to claim she meant nothing by it, but the basketball world didn't buy it for a single second. And here's why. To understand why Plum's post-FIBA comments hit so differently, you have to go back. You have to stack the history, because this is not a first offense. This is a pattern, and patterns in professional sports are the most honest thing you will ever see. It started at the WNBA All-Star Game, an event that should have been a celebration of women's basketball at its absolute peak. Players were rallying around the pay us what you owe us movement, pushing for better compensation, better resources, better investment from ownership. And look, that cause is legitimate. These athletes deserve to be paid. Nobody serious is arguing against that. But Kelsey Plum couldn't just advocate for fair pay. She had to make it about Caitlin Clark.
Sure, just United Front was determined this morning that we had a meeting for, and not to tattletale, but 0 members of Team Clark were very present for that.
0 members of Team Clark, said directly, said on camera, said at a press conference where the entire basketball world was watching. Now let's apply some basic logic to this moment. Caitlin Clark was not at the All-Star Game. She was recovering. And she was managing her own circumstances. She had 0 obligation to appear at a meeting she wasn't even physically present to attend. Targeting her absence as evidence of self-centeredness wasn't advocacy. It was a calculated attempt to use the most legitimate platform available, a players' rights movement, as cover for a personal shot.
I thought that was a little dig at Caitlin. A lot of people definitely thought so.
A lot of people. Not a fringe interpretation, not an overreaction from Clark's fan base. The broader basketball community looked at what Plum said and immediately understood the subtext. Sabrina Ionescu's face at that press conference told you everything. The discomfort was visible, the realization of what had just been set in motion, written clearly across her expression. And here's what made it worse. Here's the part that that went from petty to genuinely revealing. Not long after the All-Star controversy, Clark announced a massive global deal with Nike. Brands lining up, competing for the right to be associated with her name. 7 figures through endorsements alone. And then, almost too perfectly, Kelsey Plum posted pictures from a Nike event. Kelsey Plum signed with Under Armour, Nike's direct competitor, at a Nike event.
Help but to say that Caitlin Clark didn't join in on the t-shirt discussion.
This week they wore t-shirts saying, making a statement, you better pay us. But instead of just leaving it at that, a Kelsey Plum for LA had to take a dig at Caitlin Clark.
Clark's response was 4 words. Thanks for the Nike ad. 4 words. No press conference. No lengthy statement. No social media war. Just 4 perfectly placed words that exposed the entire situation with surgical precision and sent the internet into an absolute frenzy. That's the player we're talking about. That's the intelligence level operating here. While Plum was busy constructing subtle narratives and taking veiled shots, Clark was executing the long game with the kind of calm, calculated confidence that separates good players from historically great ones. And now, after the FIBA MVP, Plum went back to the well. Again, let's get into the specifics of what came out of Kelsey Plum's camp following Clark's FIBA MVP win, because the what matters less than the why, and the why is the most uncomfortable part of this entire story for the WNBA's veteran class. Plum's comments following the FIBA MVP announcement followed the same formula she has now used multiple times, framed just carefully enough to avoid direct confrontation, worded just vaguely enough to claim misinterpretation, but loaded, absolutely loaded, with the same underlying message that has been running through every interaction she has had with the concept of Caitlin Clark's success. She isn't happy, she isn't grateful, she isn't celebrating what this moment means for women's basketball globally. She is bothered, genuinely, visibly, undeniably bothered.
Sore losers and you have sore winners, and Kelsey Plum is both.
And here's the thing about jealousy at the professional level. It rarely stays contained to one moment. It leaks. It shows up in press conference wording. It shows up in subtle social media behavior. It shows up in the way you respond to a teammate's success with silence when the moment calls for celebration. Kelsey Plum has been in this league for years. She has talent. She has credentials. She has made her own contributions to women's basketball. But the arrival of Caitlin Clark exposed something in Plum that she clearly never anticipated having to confront. The reality that someone could come into the league and immediately, structurally, permanently change the landscape in ways that Plum's entire career never did. And that realization, that specific personal realization, is what's driving every comment, every subtle shot, every carefully worded press conference jab she has taken since Clark arrived. $250 million for a franchise expansion fee in a league that was struggling with empty arenas and zero profitability just a few years ago. That number doesn't exist without Caitlin Clark. The salary leverage that every WNBA player, including Kelsey Plum, currently holds in collective bargaining discussions doesn't exist at its current level without Caitlin Clark. This is the part that makes Plum's behavior not just petty, but genuinely self-defeating. She is actively undermining the exact player whose commercial success is funding the pay equity argument Plum claims to care about. You cannot simultaneously demand the league pay you more and take shots at the player who is single-handedly making the financial case for why that higher pay is now economically viable. The math doesn't work, the logic doesn't hold, and anyone paying attention can see exactly what's actually driving it. Let's stay in the data for a moment, because data doesn't have feelings, data doesn't have a narrative agenda, data doesn't care about veteran status or league tenure or who was here first. Data simply reflects reality, and the reality it's reflecting right now is one of the most lopsided stories in the history of women's professional sports. Before Caitlin Clark arrived, the WNBA was fighting for relevance. Games in half-empty arenas, television deals that barely registered nationally, all media coverage that existed mostly as an afterthought to the NBA calendar, expansion fees sitting at $50 million, a number that told you exactly how much the market believed in the league's future. Everything shifted. That's not hyperbole. That's a documented, measurable, financially verifiable transformation that happened in direct correlation with one player's arrival. College fans followed her. NBA fans followed her. Casual sports fans who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives suddenly had a reason to tune in on a Tuesday Thursday night. And now that player has taken that same gravitational pull to the international stage and won FIBA MVP. The story isn't contained to Indiana anymore. It isn't contained to the United States anymore. It is a global basketball narrative, and it's growing. That's the competitive landscape Kelsey Plum is operating in right now. Not against Clark on the court, that's a separate conversation. Against Clark in the cultural and commercial space that determines which athletes get remembered, on which athletes get the endorsement calls, which athletes become the face of movements rather than footnotes in someone else's story. And in that competition, the one happening off the court, in boardrooms and brand meetings and global media cycles, it isn't close. It has never been close. And every comment Plum makes that gets filtered through the lens of how it relates to Clark only reinforces the gap rather than closing it. Here's what separates Caitlin Clark from every player who has ever tried to slow her down, shade her success, or use a press conference microphone to chip away at her reputation. She doesn't take the bait, not once, not with Angel Reese, not with the flagrant fouls and the physical targeting, not with the all-star snubs and the veteran hazing disguised as toughening up the rookie, not with Kelsey Plum's carefully worded all-star press conference ambush, and not now, not after the FIBA MVP, when Plum's commentary landed in a sports media cycle that was supposed to be entirely about Clark's achievement. She said nothing, and in saying nothing, she said everything, because every time a veteran player takes a shot at Caitlin Clark and Clark doesn't respond, the dynamic becomes clearer. The person throwing the punch looks desperate, the person absorbing it looks untouchable, and the audience, the millions of new fans Clark brought into this sport, watches the whole thing and draws their own conclusions. The Nike comment was the one exception. 4 words. Thanks for the Nike ad. Perfectly timed, razor sharp. Yeah, and delivered with the kind of effortless confidence that only comes from someone who genuinely doesn't feel threatened. Real influence doesn't need noise. Read that again slowly, because that sentence is the entire thesis of what we're watching play out in real time between these two athletes. One of them is building something permanent, the other is reacting to it. One of them is expanding the universe of women's basketball, the other is commenting on the expansion from the outside. And after the FIBA MVP, the distance between those two trajectories just got wider. Let's zoom all the way out, because this story, Kelsey Plum's jealousy, Clark's FIBA MVP, the veteran resistance, the commercial transformation, this is not just a drama between two players. This is the defining tension of a league at the most important crossroads in its entire history. The WNBA is on the edge of something genuinely historic. The viewership numbers, the expansion fees, the Nike deals, the packed arenas, the media coverage, all of it is pointing toward a league that is finally, after nearly 3 decades, earning its place in the mainstream American sports conversation. Not as a niche product, not as a feel-good story that gets 2 weeks of coverage every 4 years during the Olympics, as a real, commercially viable, culturally relevant professional sports league.
The WNBA is on a hot streak. They're finally turning
a corner. That's what's at stake here. And the question, the genuinely important question underneath all of the drama and the jealousy and the press conference shade is whether the players inside this league understand what moment they're living in. Because Caitlin Clark understands it. She has understood it since the moment she stepped off the Iowa campus and into her first professional press conference. She's not just playing basketball, she's building a bridge between the world she came from and the world she arrived in, and every fan she brings with her across that bridge, every casual viewer who tunes in for Clark and stays for the sport, is a direct investment in every player's future in this league. The catalyst they've been fighting for. That's the cruel irony sitting at the center of this entire story. For years, WNBA players have been advocating for better pay, better resources, better investment. They've been right to advocate for it. The cause has always been just. And now, finally, there is a player generating the commercial gravity to make those conversations not just morally compelling, but financially inevitable. And some of those same veterans who fought for years for this moment are responding to the player, making it possible with jealousy, shade, and carefully worded press conference jabs. Kelsey Plum has been in this league long enough to know better. She has the basketball IQ to understand what Clark's FIBA MVP means for the global profile of women's basketball. She has the professional experience to recognize a rising tide when she's sitting in the middle of it, but recognizing it and accepting it are two very different things. And right now, Plum is choosing reaction over recognition, noise over substance, personal grievance over collective progress, cold-blooded, calculated, on the court at FIBA, off the court in endorsement deals, in the cultural conversation, in the global media cycle, in every arena that matters, competitive, commercial, and historical. Caitlin Clark is operating on a level that Kelsey Plum's comments cannot touch and cannot slow down. The FIBA MVP isn't a ceiling, it's a launching pad. Clark is 22 years old. She is just beginning to understand the full scope of what she's capable of. The international stage didn't humble her, it elevated her. And the players who spent the last 18 months trying to manage her rise, limit her shine, and use union meetings as ammunition against her reputation are now watching from the platform as the train pulls away from the station. This is the moment. This is the crossroads. The WNBA can embrace what Clark represents, a once-in-a-generation wave that carries the entire sport to places it has never been, or it can keep letting internal jealousy eat away at the most valuable thing the league has ever had.